Hello again. This has been a sad year for a lot of horror fans. Two very iconic horror film directors have died this year. Tobe Hooper, who directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist, and George A. Romero, who made the original Night of the Living Dead, as well as Dawn of the Dead from 1978, which is my favorite zombie movie of all time, and I reviewed both these movies, Night on my first year as a reviewer and Dawn last year, so it makes sense to review Day of the Dead this year. And also, I was already planning to review Day of the Dead well before George A. Romero passed away, and so I guess this review is also a big tribute in a way. I'm not very good at doing tributes. It's always a awkward type of thing to do, and that's why I don't do them that much anymore, but this video is dedicated to George A. Romero, a great filmmaker, one of my best influences, and his movies I love to death. And in case anyone's curious about Tobe Hooper, I didn't have as much time to prepare, but don't worry. Either this week or next, there's a mini review of two of Tobe Hooper's more underrated films. Day of the Dead was the third film in George A. Romero's original Dead trilogy, and it was the least well received or financially successful of the original three, but it's gathered a big following over the years. And I watched this, like I said last year when I reviewed Dawn, I have a hard time remembering, but when I watched this at some point when I was 15 or 16, I loved it. Just as great as Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Although Dawn is still my favorite of the original three, but I love them all, and this is actually a pretty good film. A lot of people have issue with it as far as the characters, who people think are a bit too obnoxious, swear too much, and are very unlikable.
Come on, come on! Come on, you fish brace! What the hell's the matter with you?
However, the way these characters are, I think it fits with the setting and the tone, and there's a lot of reason, I feel, for why they are the way they are in this film, and I'll try to explain. Night of the Living Dead showed us the beginning of the zombie epidemic / apocalypse. Dawn was showing the breakdown of order, I guess, and showing what little order there was left, and some people sticking around to fight it, and then the main characters of that film figuring it was best to just duck out and make it on their own. Day of the Dead pretty much takes place at the very end of the epidemic, apocalypse, whatever you want to call it. Just everything is pretty much gone, and the living are now pretty much an endangered species, with the dead overrunning everything. And our main characters here are a bunch of people living in an underground bunker. Two groups. scientists and the military. And both sides are fighting to survive, but they're not really working with each other. And everybody acts very stressed and angry and unreasonable. And I think by having them do this, it shows just how broken down society and, I guess, the idea of working together in a system has become. Just everybody's not thinking clearly, everybody's just jumping out of their skin.
I'm calling a meeting for 7 o'clock tonight. I want everybody present, and including your boyfriend.
I gave him a sedative. He won't be awake.
Look here, woman. I'm short on manpower. I won't have you going around doping up any of my men without orders from me. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Fuck you, sir.
And only a very few left can still think clearly, and while they have the ideas on how to properly survive or do something, most people just won't listen, or they're so caught up in their own bullshit.
Major Cooper promised Major Cooper is dead. I'm in command now, and I'm telling you that you work with what you got.
It's pretty emotional, pretty intense, and a little funny at times with just how crazy some of these characters get.
She got herself an honest-to-God dick to get off on, huh? It may be yellow, but it's still a dick!
I mean, I can get why some people wouldn't like this movie. It's not for the sensitive, and I don't just mean the unlikable characters. This movie has some of the most graphic gore of all of George A. Romero's films, done by the makeup legend himself, Tom Savini, who also had, working with him on the crew, Oscar winner Howard Berger, and my aunt's old college buddy, Greg Nicotero, best known now as the makeup artist for The Walking Dead, who actually has a small role in the film as one of the members of the military. The gore in this film is fucking incredible. Just, the gore in Dawn of the Dead was great, but it had a little bit of a cartoony look to it, because George A. Romero wanted Dawn to kind of feel like a comic book. Day, in a way, kind of goes back to the almost atmosphere and tone of Night, where everything feels a bit more hopeless and dark and grisly. The effects in this film, this movie, I feel, it should have been a contender for Best Makeup at the Oscars, and I know everybody thinks the Oscars are just a popularity contest, a bunch of bullshit, but it still can mean something, and I just can't say it enough. The makeup here is wonderful, it's terrific, it is gruesome, it could make someone throw up, that's how great it is, that's how graphic it is. The best effects in this film include a scene where we see a zombie that's had all of its organs removed by one of the scientists to see if he removes it all, will it still walk, will it still think, and he points out, it still wants to eat even though it has no stomach anymore. And we get this moment where the zombie sits up on a gurney it's been strapped to, and we literally see its remaining guts spill out of its open body. It really looks like there's nothing in there. And the best death scenes, I would say, come with the military later on, and I'll go into more detail when I get to the spoiler section, but these deaths include somebody getting their head ripped off of their body, and while there is a noticeable effects error, like the mouth is still kind of moving after the head comes off, it's still extremely impressive, because like the guy's screaming as they're pulling, and then plop. And then there's this bit where this guy is laughing like a maniac, just gone crazy, and the zombies get him, and as he's laughing, just going ah ha ha ha, they rip into his head and just skin him, and we see like his eyeball sticking out just from there. The last one I'll save for the spoilers. Just great special effects, very awards worthy, and Tom Savini was under a lot of stress, I read, when he made this, and despite some like almost setbacks, the effects came out perfect. Just perfect. There was actually a lot more story in George A. Romero's original script. However, the budget that was estimated for this script would have been $7 million. And Romero was told he could only get the money if he could make it an R-rated film. And while he has made some, for the Dead trilogy, the original at least, an R rating just ain't gonna work. So a deal was reached where the film would have no rating, and there would be no limits on gore or how graphic he wanted to make it. He just had to work with a $3.5 million budget. And while it cut back his original idea, he made the film he wanted to make, and sources vary, but I think at one point he said he thought Day was his personal favorite of the original Dead trilogy. That could be misquote. I read once that Dawn was his favorite. Either way, Day is not a bad film, as its original release would probably lead some people to believe, and some critics' opinion would lead you to believe. This is a special edition, I think, and in it is this little booklet, and I have to hold my fingers over it, but on the back is a naked, rotting corpse lady. This little thing is called From the Files of Dr. Logan, one of the scientist characters, and included here is part of, I believe, Roger Ebert's not so positive review. Hard to say. I guess George Romero maybe got a little kick out of it. If I seem a little off, just I'm not sure exactly what to do, just because there's a little bit. I'm very emotional talking about this movie with Romero's passing, and I'm tired, and I'm gonna do my best. Just forgive me if I'm a little not completely on my game. Also working on the movie's crew were George A. Romero's once longtime producing partner, Richard P. Rubinstein. And this would be the final film that they worked on as director and producer. Rubinstein would later produce some movies that George A. Romero wrote, but I guess business-wise they decided just not to continue. It happens. The cinematography was done by another longtime co-collaborator of Romero, Michael Gornick, who would later go on to direct Creepshow 2. And the editing was done by Pasquale, Pasquale, Bubba, B-U-B-A, Pasquale Bubba. Pasquale also edited Romero's Creepshow, as well as later on, Michael Mann's Heat. Impressive body of work. And I'd say the cinematography and the editing from these two guys was top-notch. Transitioning wise, the editing is extremely well done and the film flows. We never feel like we're suddenly in a new place at an awkward moment, and the camera working in a very tight location. The underground bunker that the film takes place in for the majority of the time was not a set. I read that they actually filmed in a real mine called the Wampum Mine, which was near Pittsburgh. And I read this on IMDb, so it may be true or not true, but apparently a lot of the cast and crew actually slept in this underground mine while filming to save time in going back and forth between a hotel and this mine that was probably this several hundred feet below and probably far away from the city, which I'm guessing probably put a genuine feel of claustrophobia in the cast, and who knows, may have contributed to their performances. And just a cool small thing to note, Galen Ross, who played Fran in Dawn of the Dead, was billed as New York City casting in the end credits. Nice to know she, in some way, came back to the series. And this is another fun fact. Apparently during filming in the mines, someone would play Michael Jackson's Thriller as they had all the actors in zombie makeup going around. That's awesome. That's cool. And as always, something that I always feel makes a great horror film is its music scoring, which is done here by John Harrison. I don't know him a lot from anything else. He directed later on the Tales from the Dark Side movie. So I guess he branched out. But his music score here is extremely good. It's very different. Like Night of the Living Dead had a very haunting type of music to it. Dawn of the Dead had a very stylized and sometimes dark and occasionally comedic music style. And here in Day of the Dead we get, for lack of a better word, a very rocking soundtrack. I mean, the music, it is very orchestral at times and very chilling and puts you in the right mood. But as the film goes on, particularly in some of the more action-based scenes, we get kind of a rock theme going on, and it's very cool, very 80s, and the zombies really look great in this film. They have more of a familiar look that most people associate with zombies today. And like in the last film, they kind of had a bluish look to them, which could kind of make sense. I mean, that look was kind of an accident because they didn't know it would come off like that on the film stock they were using. But here these zombies have a very rotted green look to them, and They just look so grotesque. It's fucking great, and apparently most of the people playing the zombies were residents of Pittsburgh who just wanted to work on the film and just volunteered. And I read that all the extras who portrayed zombies in the climax were paid in a cap that said, "I played a zombie in Day of the Dead." Cool, but I think they should also have one that says, "I played a zombie in Day of the Dead, and here's the papers to prove it." And they also were given a copy of this fake newspaper that appears at the very beginning of the film, when the main characters briefly go above ground and we see the wind blow this newspaper up that says, "The Dead Walk." And, as the final bit of payment to each zombie extra, $1. And this movie, that's the perfect payment. Along with, of course, seeing yourself on the big screen in full zombie getup. I just remembered, I was made up to look like a zombie once for a project I did in high school where I volunteered to be made up for this commercial that our class was shooting, our video production class was making for this local costume shop. I think it was only shown in the school and maybe on the town's public access channel. It's been years and I can't remember everything, but I was made up to look like a zombie, so that's another thing I can really relate to with this movie, and I really appreciate the process, like all the hard work that goes into making someone up, because the thing I did, it was just me and this one guy, and it didn't look like Romero film worthy, but it was a fun costume, and just thinking of what it's like for a crew to make it look as real as possible is just very admirable, and just the people who put the work behind the camera deserve a lot of praise. They don't get enough. But the people on camera also put in hard work. Good example, the actors playing the zombies in Day of the Dead, for the scenes where they're eating people's guts, they used actual pig intestines, which they ripped around, bit into, and I read that apparently while they were filming, somebody unplugged the refrigerator that they were storing the intestines in, and as a result, the zombie actors became very physically sick. For the craft, man. For the craft. The last thing I'll say about the film's production design is that they really nailed the post-apocalyptic look. The very first scene, which is the main character and a member of the military, who we find out later is her boyfriend, and a pilot and a radio operator just flying above a deserted city. Just so barren and eerie looking. My first thought when I rewatched this movie was, you kind of expect Mad Max to show up around the corner. That's how post-apocalyptic it looks. Just throw in the Road Warrior, and actually that'd be pretty awesome, having Mad Max fighting zombies. Hey, wouldn't be the most silly thing the Mad Max movies have done. And while they filmed the underground bunker scenes near Pittsburgh, the above ground scenes were filmed in Florida, I believe. And you can kind of tell there's palm trees in the main city in the first scene, and very briefly there's a alligator that appears in the city, which is then followed by a couple of zombies. Which makes you wonder, do the zombies just not eat animals anymore, or are they just focusing on humans? Because we saw in Night of the Living Dead they would eat bugs. I don't know, maybe even they know not to fuck with an alligator. And no doubt making this review a two-parter, let's get into the cast. The main character for this film is Dr. Sarah Bowman, played by Laurie Cardile, whose father, Bill Cardile, aka Chilly Billy, appeared as a news reporter in both the 1968 and the 1990 versions of Night of the Living Dead. But Laurie Cardile, she was an excellent lead in this film. Her character is more or less the leader of the scientist group, and she struggles to keep stability and keep everybody focused, and she's the only female in this group, which makes her the victim of a lot of verbal sexual harassment and people just being sexist assholes, bullies to her.
Come and get it! Come and try to bite it or... Still, whip it out! That'll bring him on! Fucking A, biggest piece of meat in the cave. I don't want to excite the lady, though. Not with her boyfriend around.
But she stands strong, and even though no one listens a lot of the time, she makes her case, and if the moment calls for it, she takes charge and shows that she can be very commanding, and she can be someone you do not want to fuck with.
You almost fucking killed Rick. Let him go, Steele.
He shouldn't have been up there in the first place.
You almost fucking killed him.
Let him go! God damn it! Or I'll cut you in half.
But she also has her moments where she gets upset, and she's an extremely human character, Sarah, and Laurie Cardile loves how tough she is, and she, to this day, is still very appreciative of George Romero for making the character so strong. The leader of the military group is Captain Rhodes, who is considered by many to be the most memorable character in Day of the Dead, played by Joseph Pilato. And there's a fun fan theory, because Joseph Pilato appeared in Dawn of the Dead pretty much as an extra. Like, I can't even notice him when I watch Dawn, and I've seen Dawn so many times. He played an extra. He played a cop in Dawn of the Dead who I don't think even had any lines. And fans like to speculate that that cop character is Captain Rhodes, maybe before he became part of the army, or maybe when he was not in active duty. Hard to say. It could be, but it's a stretch. It's probably just a coincidence, but it's a good fan theory. The Captain Rhodes character is... man, this guy is the definition of sleazy military officer. And he comes off as so insane at times, like not losing touch insane, but just more sociopathic, more psychotic, in that he threatens to have anybody that disobeys him shot.
Sit down. Sit down, or so help me God, I'll have you shot.
What?
I said, I'll have you shot.
And even his own men are unnerved by the way he runs things at times. Like when he orders one of them to kill one of the scientists for disobeying him, the soldier just jokes by going,
Bang! You're dead! Shoot that woman or you were dead. You think I'm fucking around?
he's a good example of somebody who's just losing it with everything going around with the zombies. He won't listen to anybody else. He won't really reason. He wants to do what he wants, and a big theme of this movie is the scientists versus the military, making this the second movie for this October season that I've reviewed that has this kind of theme. And this is one of the movies that does it very well. The scientists are trying to study the zombies, and even amongst the scientists, they have different views of what they should do. Sarah and this other scientist named Dr. Ted Fisher, played by John Amplis, are studying a way to figure out what caused the zombies and how they could possibly destroy them. And there's this other doctor who is another very memorable character named Dr. Logan, played by Richard Liberty. That's a name. And Dr. Logan, he's another crazy character, but different type of crazy. He's not aggressive and inhuman as Rhodes is. He's just he's one of those scientist characters that is so caught up in his research that he's kind of oblivious to just the harsh truth or reality that's going on around him. And his idea is to train the zombies to not want to attack or eat humans.
It can be domesticated, Sarah, don't you see? It can be conditioned to behave the way we want it to behave.
And all that's required is 15 hours of fancy surgery that only a handful of people are trained to do.
In the military, they don't want to listen to either story. I mean, they want to get rid of all the zombies, but they don't want to wait for a scientific reason. And Rhodes, at a very funny but stereotypical moment, yells,
Formulas, equations, a lot of fancy terms that don't mean a thing. I want to know if you're doing something that's going to help us out of this deep shit we're in.
He says that they should just blow them all away, that's all they're interested in. And Logan, while he's a bit crazed in his study of them, points out that they don't have enough ammunition to kill all the zombies.
You don't have enough ammunition, Captain. Shoot them all in the head. Time to have done that would have been at the beginning. No, you let them overrun us. They have overrun us, you know. We're in the minority now.
Rhodes at one point threatens to leave and just leave the scientists behind. And Logan points out that...
Where will you go, Captain? Do you really think you can blow the piss out of them? All of them? They have you in a hopeless situation strategically. You're lost.
This bunker they're in, this operation they're all a part of, the people who started or gave the orders to start it, they are pretty much gone and they're all on their own. And Logan says that the scientists, their research, what they're trying to figure out is all the military guys have. In certain areas, the scientists and the military have good points. The scientists want to study, the military wants just to kill them all. In the end, they both want to stay alive, and you think that a little bit of both could maybe be a big solution. Other military characters include Steele, played by Gary Howard Clark, who is the most obnoxious and just person you want to see get eaten character. He's just, it's hard to describe. I'll just play a clip.
Let's go, you dumb fucks! Get over here!
He's over the edge. He's turning into Jello.
Jello? That's the way his pigs say yellow. Jello! Maybe I should put him in quarantine. You call it, Captain. I'll build him a cage.
Other privates include Private Rickles, played by Ralph Marrero, M-A-R-E-R-O. And he's pretty much just as obnoxious as Steele, but he's given a few more, I guess, vulnerable moments. And there's also, these characters don't really get much to do, but they're played by two very big members of the crew, because low-budget movie, gotta get everybody in there. Private Torres, played by Tasso and Stavrakis, and Private Johnson, played by Greg Nicotero. Both these guys were Tom Savini's assistants on different movies, and Tasso is the guy who gets his head pulled off. And Greg Nicotero, there's a scene where after he's dead, we see Dr. Logan experimenting on his body, and we see like a severed head, which is still moving and it's active, like even though the head's been separated from the body, because it's still got a brain, it can still function. And I read a funny fact that Greg Nicotero actually, on a break during filming, took that realistic head and played a prank on his mother with it. And this head is so fucking realistic. I can just imagine what his mother's reaction must have been like. And the last of the privates is Miguel Salazar, played by Anthony DeLello Jr. And it's stated pretty early on that Miguel and Sarah are a couple. And it seems like one of those relationships that came to be because they're trapped and they don't have anybody else, and it seems like she does care about him a lot, but he's a mess. He's sleep deprived and very insecure about himself, and one of those cases where he's insecure that his girlfriend is stronger than him.
No, I don't need help. I don't need help.
Come on, give me this.
I'm all right. I'm just tired.
You're not all right. You're collapsing from stress. Now let me help.
Stress? We're all collapsing. This whole fucking unit is collapsing. I know you're strong, all right. So what? Stronger than me. Stronger than everyone. So what? So fucking what?
They really shouldn't be together at this time, but she cares, and even though it seems like the relationship is dead pretty early on, she tries to help him when she can, and this character is just a wreck. And when this character, not much of a spoiler, kind of meets his end, it's not surprising, but it's pretty emotional. Miguel is not the type of character who survives a zombie movie. A bit hard to sympathize with, but in the end, I feel a little sorry for him. And next to the scientists and the military people, there's two other characters that don't really fit into either group, who kind of see both sides and what both groups want as kind of a hopeless cause. John, played by Terry Alexander, the helicopter pilot, and Bill McDermott, played by Jarlath Conroy. John and McDermott keep to themselves pretty much in this trailer where they've created kind of their small little oasis where they can sit back and just get drunk. And in the one scene where Sarah goes to them, she sits down, and the character of John, who by the way is Jamaican, and these characters are good, but not that there's anything wrong with a Jamaican character, but the accent and the way he talks, just after a while it gets a little grating. But the actor Terry Alexander still does a very good job playing a very flawed character, but at the same time one of the most humane characters. John and McDermott say that they feel the best approach would be just to take the helicopter and fly out to an island somewhere far away from the zombie-infested country, and says that they should enjoy their remaining years. He gives this big monologue where he talks about how it's pointless, and he feels if there's any hope for the future, they should either wait it out or try to teach their kids to be smarter than they were. And as far as figuring out a reason for the zombie epidemic, kind of similar to Ken Foree in Dawn of the Dead, where he says, "When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth." John says he thinks that the zombies coming to life, attacking everybody, putting the world into chaos and anarchy. He says he thinks it's God's way of punishing them for being imperfect. Yeah, we got a religious guy in this movie. He's not the worst, and like I said, despite being very flawed and kind of smug, and I did want to see this character get whacked at a few moments. He later shows that he's one of the few people left who still is in touch with his humanity. And in the end, I liked him. Bit of a rough patch, but in the end I did learn to like him, along with McDermott, whose main character trait is that he's an Irish drunk.
Lay off the fucking booze for a while, why don't you?
If we stay down here long enough, I'll have to lay off the fucking booze still, because there won't fucking be any of it fucking left. In the meanwhile, I will continue to indulge myself.
All I can think is, there's some Irish people in my family, and if there's a zombie epidemic and the world runs out of alcohol, I can think of a few people who are probably gonna go nuts.